Hey everyone, and welcome back to Life and Landscapes in Ecuador. It's an absolutely beautiful day here today. A little overcast now. So as the title and description show, I want to talk a little bit today about my best photos of 2022. So originally I thought about just putting up a slide presentation of the photos that I thought were the best. And indeed I may do that yet. But I thought before that I want to talk a little bit about the criteria that I used to choose the best photos, what I consider to be my best photos of 2022. And you can use these criteria as well in choosing your own photos, the best of the best, or when reviewing someone else's photos as well. Just before we start, however, a reminder of my setup. I'm using this Canon 6D with a Sigma 150 to 600. All of these photos were shot on this, most of them at 600 millimeters. A lot of them are very small birds, hard to get close to. This is an older camera. Wish I had a better one, but this is what I've got, and so this is what I've shot these on. And even though this camera now is 10 years old, you can still get some good shots with it. So the first criteria I want to talk about is quality. And when I talk about quality, I mean sharpness. Is the photo in focus? Is the face and as much of the body of the bird in focus? Nice contrast, not too much noise. And this can be difficult, of course, shooting very small birds, and especially in dark conditions. So to illustrate what I mean by quality, I've got some examples for you. So the first photo we have here is of a Saffron Finch. I took this photo in the morning on a sunny day. So for this I was able to keep the ISO down, shutter speed of 1/1600th, which is really nice. This is down to about a 1/4 crop, but still I was able to get a lot of quality. The photo is sharp, not only in the face of the bird and beak, but throughout the length of the bird's perch as well. A lot of that has to do with the way the bird is perched, which I can talk a little bit more about later. But I'm really happy with this. Lots of detail, lots of clarity. Second photo we have is of a blue-gray tanager. It was taken just outside my kitchen window. I was able to get such a low shutter speed because I had the camera actually sitting on the kitchen counter. This photo was also taken earlier in the morning. So the bird is sharp, particularly in the face. As it progresses back towards the feet and tail, not as sharp. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the bird is facing me, so his body is clearly elongated. It's hard to get enough of a focal length to capture the entire bird in focus without getting your ISO too high. The last example in this category is of a whooping Motmot. I took this out on the road in front of my house. ISO 400 was nice and low. A lower shutter speed, 1/400, but f9, so I got lots of depth here. The bird is facing me. I like its perch. I like the way the head is tilted, but generally speaking, the photo is entirely in focus and nice and sharp. So I really like the quality of the pose. I like a lot about this photo, and it's an interesting, colorful bird on top of it. So the next criteria I want to talk about is composition. Now it's true we can change the composition to some degree afterwards by cropping, etc., moving the photo around. But we have to think about composition when we're in the field as well. What's the relationship of the bird to its post, to the foreground? How much sky? What's the background? This all comes into play when we're thinking about composition. And a lot of times, unless we shoot very wide angle and crop a lot, we're not going to be able to do everything in post. So we got to think about this when we're in the field. Now sometimes you get a really nice composition, but a terrible photo. And I have an example here of that. This next photo is of two Magnifacent Frigatebirds. I love the juxtaposition of these two birds. I like the activity in the sky, but it's not a very good photo. It's not in focus, and it's fairly noisy, especially in the birds. They're so dark against this bright sky. I just want to show you this photo though as a complete black and white. I think this makes an interesting composition. It just goes to show that even though the photo's not that great, if you got a great composition, maybe there's something you can do with it. Change something about it to make it usable. So I thought this was a good case of that. We don't necessarily have to throw away our photos just because they're not exactly perfect as far as quality is concerned. Second example here I have of composition is of a great thrush. I took this in a park in Loja, just north of here. I like a lot about this photo, but especially I like the fact that it captures the bird's environment. The bird is off to the right quite a bit, and yet it's still fairly sharp. It's clear, but it captures the branch that it's sitting in with the lichen and the moss and the other plants that are growing on it. I like the background as well. Just an overall nice picture. I like the way the picture is framed, etc. So I could have improved this photo a bit with a tripod, but as is often the case, there's no time to set up a tripod. You just got to take the shot. The last one in this example is of two groove-billed anis. I took this also in a park in Loja. I really like the way these birds are posed. Even though the sky is washed out and the focus is not perfect, I just like the way they're sort of up above me, looking down on me a bit. Very ominous looking, kind of like the crows that you see in some kind of old horror movie. They give this sort of menacing look to them. And so for that reason, I really like the composition, even though the photo itself did not turn out spectacular. Okay, so moving on, the next criteria I want to talk about is subject matter. And what I mean by this is what's happening in the photo, what's the subject. It could be that this is a very rare bird, very hard to see, so even though the photo's not that great, it makes it special just because of the rarity of the species. Or it could be the activity. Is it displaying something that is very difficult to capture or very rare? And so that makes the photo special as well, even though it's not the greatest of quality. I have an example here of that. This is of another groove-billed ani. This photo is heavily cropped, 1:10, because it was a long ways off. But the bird here was just sunning himself on a post, trying to warm up. It was early in the morning. For Ecuador, this part, it was cold. It was probably about 15 degrees. And it was just a really nice pose. And even though it was a long ways away and it's not a great quality photo, I really like the activity, the behavior that's taking place in this photo. The next one is this Peruvian Pygmy Owl. Now, these are not that uncommon, and I have other photos of them, but I really like the way this bird is kind of looking back at me, and the fact that it's got a frog in its talons sitting on this branch, almost looking back at me saying, you know, this is mine, you can't have it. I took this photo, I just jumped out of the car and started shooting. I didn't have time to set up anything. So it's not the greatest, it's fairly high ISO, 6400, but it cleaned up nicely, and it also has a nice little vignette, which is kind of naturally formed by the branches and trees around it. Okay, so the last example I have in this category is of Amazilia hummingbird feeding her young, her chick. It's not a great photo. It's very noisy. This camera, this 60, is not great in low light. So it didn't clear up, even though it's ISO 2500. It wasn't in great focus either. But the subject matter was just really precious. I don't think that I will ever see, or may never ever see, this exact subject matter again of a hummingbird feeding her young, especially a hummingbird in flight like this. So for that reason, it makes it very special, even though the photo is not that great. So before I move on to my favorite photos of the year, I just want to talk a little about the last category, and that is, do I like the photo? How do I feel about the photo? What's my gut reaction to it the first time I see it? When I take it off the camera, I process it, and I'm looking at it on my computer screen. How do I feel about the photo? Do I feel the same way even after I've looked at it many times? So quite often, that's the way photos are judged. People's gut reaction to them. So with that in mind, I want to go on to 4 photos that I consider are my best of 2022. The first example I have is of a striated heron. I took this in a park very close to our home in Loja. It's a very public place, but the herons are quite common here. First of all, it's very sharp. Sharp all the way along the length of the bird. The dragonfly is very sharp. Also, the composition is nice. I've got some foreground, I've got some background, I've got some foliage. Yeah, the lighting's excellent. I just really like this photo. And of course, the fact that there's some activity going on, some behavior in the subject as well, makes it really interesting. The second one is of Pacific parrotlets. I caught this at 1:2500. With this camera, with this lens combination, it's difficult to catch birds in flight. Just doesn't seem to be able to pick them up. This one is not quite in flight, but it's landing at least, and the wings are okay, 1:2500. It's just a little bit of motion blur there. But overall, the picture is fairly sharp, not too much noise, and I just really like the composition of this photo. The next example I have here is of a Peruvian Pygmy Owl. What I really like about this, well, 2 things, is I like the way that the curved branch at the bottom and the curved branch at the top are framing the owl itself. And of course, I really like the fact that the bird is looking back at me with those bright yellow eyes. So definitely one of my favorite photos of the year. And finally, we have a couple of tropical kingbirds. I took this at a park in Loja too, in last February, I believe, February or March. I really like a lot about this. The photo's sharp. I like the way the branches are hanging down, kind of like a curtain and a backdrop. But especially for me, it's the way the female is looking over at the male, and the male's kind of got his head tilted in one direction. I have to say, yeah, well, whatever. We don't know what the conversation was about, but we can imagine a conversation like this taking place between a human couple. So for that reason, I really like this photo. I think everything about it turned out really nice. Okay, so that's my explanation of the criteria that I use. As I mentioned before, you can use these criteria in choosing your own photos. Which of these is my favorite? Well, I really can't narrow it down beyond those four. I really like them all for different reasons. But hey, let me know in the comments what you think is your favorite. Okay, so thanks very much for tuning into this. Thanks for tuning in to Life and Landscapes. We'll talk to you next time.